Thank you so much for coming early on a Monday morning. And as all of you in the room know, Common Core has become an incredibly controversial, sort of started out, introduced 3 years ago, and it seems a little bit under the radar in a way, in that if you ask the general parent on the street and who with children in public school, they didn't know what the Common Core was and are only now still even getting to know what it is. And my sense, at least as a reporter, is that there are so many people who don't know much about it, and the debate is being formed by, in many ways, politics, not about the substance of the standards or what it will take to have them adopted.
I happened to be chairman of the National Governors Association when the Bush administration was working on No Child Left Behind, and some of us got in a little bit of trouble, I guess, by pointing out that we thought there was a little problem on the assessment side here, that there wasn't anything that was going to allow state A to compare to state B to C. And so, not surprisingly, the way that worked, we end up with all the states in the top half. Pretty good trick. I would say that education, I passionately believe, is a local and state activity. It's not a federal activity, and the federal role is de minimis. And frankly, one of the challenges we've had with Common Core state standards is the federal decision to make that part of the criteria on race to the top. Had they not done that, I think we'd have been in a much better position today.
And do you think the states would have adopted them without that carrot?
They were adopting them.
Right.
Yeah, they were well along. I mean,
Right.
they didn't need the federal impetus to do that, because many of us, if I look at Michigan, for example, one of the most effective things that I could do in Michigan, perhaps, is to point out that kids in Ohio are gaining on us. We would be distraught if Michigan kids tested, say, behind kids in Ohio, but we'd be nervous if they were gaining on us. So you'd be, and there is a competition among states that does matter. Today, we know realistically it's a competition across the world. It's a global competition, but it's hard to motivate parents on the basis that, gee, the kids over in, the kids of Tiger Moms are really doing well, and kind of, oh my gosh, do I have to work that hard? Well, yeah, you kind of do, but I mean, the reality is that we ought to be able at least to say, here's how we're doing in mathematics, and here's how our kids are doing against, we don't even know very much or very comfortably even across town or across the state, but we kind of need to know this. And so when I talk about Common Core state assessments, that's the other part of this. It's not just the standards, it is the assessments. The standards without any assessments won't get us very far.
When I'm out talking with the community at large, what they say to me is we're getting a little bit of information about what the standards are and how, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We don't understand why. We think we have good schools. Some of our folks are in pretty high-performing schools. As the governor said, somewhere in America, somebody's doing something right to solve every issue that we have around public education. And so people are thinking, why not share best practices instead of turning things topsy-turvy? We're not going to say that any other child in any other point on this earth is any smarter than the kids we bring into the situation in the United States of America. But somewhere there's a disconnect. We're not connecting the dots, and we need to do that. We need to be better, and we need to make sure that we have commonly agreed to what is essential knowledge. What should students know and be able to do at each progression of his or her or their educational experience to be college ready or career ready when they graduate from high school. Teachers get that. And I have been in classrooms across the state of Maryland and talked to teachers from across the country. They like Common Core state standards. For one thing, it narrows the scope. Instead of trying to do this survey of a million things, it narrows the scope. There are anchor standards, so the standards are consistent pre-K through 12. The domains change as the rigor progresses up the grade level. So what are these standards? These standards are not curricula. They are essential skills and knowledge that we all agree, 45 states in the District of Columbia, that students should know and be able to do. Our teachers love it because finally there is a cohesive progression, and they were a part of building all of this for the first time in a long time. We actually went to teachers and said, help us think this out. You're the experts in the classroom.
As the transition is made from the older set of standards and the older set of tests to the newer set of standards and the newer set of tests, depending on how that's worked out, if we think there's a lot of moving parts there. So we have, generally speaking, we set the standards and we develop assessments that we think to the best of our abilities are aligned to those. And then how the students perform on those tests is a measure of how well they know the material. But, in between that beginning, the introduction and the conclusion there's a lot of work that goes on. So there's teacher preparation, professional development, instructional materials. And what I worry is that, so we're seeing in some of these states that are rolling out these new tests that students are scoring significantly lower on them, right? So we see this, the common sort of narrative that's about that is because the standards are higher and the students aren't prepared and that's why they're not doing well. Well, there's a couple problems with that. So the first one is, if any of you are familiar with the work of Daniel Koretz at Harvard, probably one of the most talented psychometricians in America, he'll tell you anytime you switch children to a new test that test stuff that they weren't used to before or ask questions that they weren't used to, you're going to see a huge dip in scores. But also on a deeper level, if students aren't performing up to that standard, and we just have those two sort of data points where we have where they performed on the old test and where they performed on the new test, we don't know why. So is it because the materials that they were using weren't aligned to these new standards? And so we just didn't teach them the right stuff. And the teacher did a dynamite job and everything he or she were supposed to and were really interesting, engaging, but the domain of stuff that we taught them wasn't what ended up on the test. We have the same problem of saying, well, maybe the teachers didn't receive the professional development that they needed. We know a lot of the research that's out there on professional development is scarce at best, that it's actually effective in helping people do stuff. But because of the way that the standards are being rolled out in this way, it's very hard for us to disaggregate that in an extremely fraught process. And what I worry when we talk about this sort of prescriptive nature is that we're going to see some state really knock these tests out of the park. And then everyone's going to say, oh, we just need to do what that state does because they've cracked the code. But there could be any number of moving parts in there.
Let me say 4 things quickly. Number 1, there's too much testing. Number 2, when one says the flaw here is also that testing equals accountability and accountability equals testing. 3, we are living in an alternative universe right now with this panel in one place and with teachers and parents. Take New York, Louisiana, New Mexico. I think, frankly, Lillian has done a far better job than most superintendents and state chiefs in understanding this and navigating this. But we here, when we talk about all this stuff in Washington, total alternative universe, because what's happening, and that gets to number 4, is that regardless of anything that we say here, in the main, most teachers have not been given the time, tools to actually implement this huge new shift of instruction, which, and I will get in a lot of trouble for saying it, I, like Governor Engler, really believe in. I think the instructional shift is really important if we're going to align schools and help kids get the tools they need to succeed in life. But you think that the Obamacare implementation is bad, the implementation of Common Core is far worse. And that's why you're seeing regular, wonderful, fantastic teachers who want nothing more than to just help be driven crazy by people like on this panel saying, you're just afraid of accountability, you're just afraid of testing. So frankly, I think we need to have an actually different accountability system where figuring out not only have we taught it, but have kids learned it is pretty important. But we also have to look at other measures like nutrition and health and the other kinds of things that help kids get ready to learn. And you never hear about that piece of accountability.